Kum Lenin Ablak Gemara, Erev Shabbos Kedesh, Parshas Nosoi, and we are up to Tav Tzadik Hey Amid Aleph. So the last thing we learned was that if a person deliberately goes ahead and marries his wife, so has relations with his wife's sister, his wife is not usher to him. And we want to know, how do you know that? So one thing is, we said, if you did it by mistake, there's a married woman by mistake lives with somebody else, she cannot go back to the original husband. But if a husband lives with his wife's sister, even though it's an Isa Karas, he could go back to the original wife. And we said the reason is, we're not going to ban if it's by mistake, since even on purpose, you're allowed to go back to your first wife. So you want to know why. Why taka you're allowed to go back to your first wife if on purpose you went ahead and you had relations with her sister, where there's an Isa Karas. Says the Gemara, how do you know it's not forbidden? The Tanya will but I said. It says in the pasuk that it says that v'shachav ish oisa, if another man had relations with her and she hid it from her husband, so on and so forth, and then so on, she becomes asa. So what's the kvetch oisa? The emphasis is that she lived with another person. So we dash on oisa shchiva oisarta. Only if she herself lived with another person is it forbidden. But if her sister did something wrong, it doesn't have any bearing on her. So if her husband had relations with her sister, she is permitted. Now, why do we need a pasuk? Because without the pasuk, I would have thought differently. I would have thought the following, and this little cryptic part of the Bryce is what most of the Gemara here will try to discuss. And it goes as follows: there's a kal v'chemer. Madach in a place where the Isa is considered a light Isa. And that's what we're going to discuss later. What are we referring to when we say a light Isa? We would have thought that in a case where the light Isa is the one who causes the problems in the first place, the one who is a catalyst for the Isa, it becomes, as a result, consequently, it becomes Asr as well. Most will see what that means. Mokim Shabo al Isa Chama, where there's a much more stringent, severe Isa, ain't it surely Shenesar Isa, the one that causes the problem, the one that says because of me that became an Isa, surely that person should also become us as well. We'll soon see. Amar Rabbi Yehuda comes along. We'll explain all this in a minute. Amar Rabbi Yehuda is like this. There's no discussion between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. According to Rabbi Yehuda's version, we had yesterday about a mother-in-law and her daughter, or mother-in-law and her mother. There's no argument between Hillel and Beis Hillel, Beis Shammai, if somebody's relation with his mother-in-law, as ishtay. That's not what we learned yesterday, that his wife is permitted. No, his wife becomes usher. If your relation with his mother-in-law, the wife becomes usher. When do they argue? What happens if you have relations with your wife's sister? Whether you're still allowed to live with your wife. Beis Shammai says it's possible because of this kal v'chemer that says that since she is the cause of your issur, why can't you live with that other woman? A man's not married to a wife. It's because it's your wife's sister. So the wife is the one that caused you to be usher to live with that other woman. Therefore, she herself becomes usher as well in this case. And he doesn't agree with that pasuk Isa. Beis Hillel says Beis Hillel says it's not possible because we have a pasuk that says that v'shachav ish Isa only if she herself had relations with a person that's Asa. Here she had no relation with a person that's Asa, therefore because his wife's sister and husband in Aveda, it doesn't any way reflect on her. So that's Rabbi Yehuda comes along Rabbi Yisi and he says no. Beis Shammai does not argue. Everyone agrees if you have relations with your wife's sister, even deliberately, your wife is permitted. Why? Your wife is permitted because of that pasuk. Only if she slept with somebody she didn't. Her sister slept, not her. When do they argue? They argue regarding a mother-in-law. Beis Shammai says that if you have relations with your mother-in-law, you can no longer live with your wife. And Beis Hillel says loy paisel. There's no bearing on your wife. Why? What's the logic? Why loy paisel? So he explains as follows: because. So right now, Rabbi Yossi is explaining why is it that everyone agrees when it comes to your wife's sister, you still have to live with your wife. She says as follows: before they got married, he could have married any woman he wanted, and she could have married any man that she wanted. What happened? Kitcha, they got engaged. What was the result of the engagement? Now they're both unlimited. Who Oisra he forbids her from marrying others. Vihi asarta, she places an isser on him. Whose isser is greater? Whose net is greater? Marubi isser sha'asra mi isser sha'asatu. It's much greater the isser that he places on her than what she places on him. Why? Shahu asra b'chol nashroila. As a result of him getting her engaged, she can only marry any man. But he loyasatu ela, she imposes an issue that he cannot live with her sister, with her mother. A few people that he cannot live with, but he's allowed to marry other women and have a second wife. So now there's a kal Umahu Madachi that he put such a big Easter on her that she can no longer with any man in the world. Shagagab Asla, what happened? Let's say by mistake. He lived with someone that's Asr Einan Mutula. So if he lived by mistake with, let's say, his wife's sister, he's not Asr with his wife who is permitted to him. Right? So she that she in two elders that she has such a weak kayach that she only asked him on a few immediate relatives. He shogag ba'asalai. So if he made a mistake in someone that's asa to him, let's say his sister, ain't it surely that it should not be asa to someone that is mutter to him. In other words, go back again. If she by mistake, she was raped, whatever it is, or by mistake, slept with another man, she could go back to her original husband. So Madach, in the case where the husband is so powerful, put so many Yisurim in her, she's also the whole world. Yet if she made a mistake, she can still live with her husband. So surely in the case where she only imposes limited Yisurim on him, if he made a mistake and lived with one of those Yisurim, let's say his wife's sister, then he should be able to go back, still live with his wife. So that explains in a case where it was inadvertent, there was a mistake, why he can live with his original wife. Well, the maiden night, how do I know? I'll go a step further. How do I know that if he deliberately slept with his wife's sister, that he can still continue living with his wife? Here we have the pasuk Isa. Only if she herself was involved, she cannot go back to her husband. But if her sister committed a sin, it has no bearing on her, which is what we said on top of the page. And so now we're going to try to explore and understand Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda said that everyone agrees that with your mother-in-law, if you have a relationship with mother-in-law, you can no longer live with your wife. And what are they arguing on about your wife's sister? My time with Rabbi Yehuda. What is the logic of Rabbi Yehuda? See, why the mother-in-law does have a bearing on the wife, according to him, that everyone agrees that it does. Says the Gemara, but it says a pasuk we had this yesterday. If a mother and a daughter, if you're living with a mother and a daughter, is ba'esh yisrafu, you should then burn them. Oisai, him, the man, and eshen, and them. And we had Rabbi Shmuel said eshen is a Greek word which means he only her. And Rabbi Kiva says it means both. And Rabbi Kiva learned both means. According to Abaye, it means the mother-in-law and her mother. In other words, if you're living with your mother-in-law and your grandmother-in-law. And according to Shrav, it means only while your wife is alive is your mother-in-law forbidden. But only your mother-in-law gets punished. If your wife is no longer alive, your mother-in-law is permitted. So let's see how Rabbi Yehuda learns. Why should the wife be punished? What did she do wrong? She's allowed to marry you. If it's not coming to tell you that your wife should be punished, but to how is she involved? She can no longer live with you. Okay, that's the logic of Yehuda. Allah is not like Rabbi Yehuda. And therefore, we have an argument regarding his wife's sister. And according to Beis Hill, you can still live with your wife. Says the Gemara. There's a story of it. So the Becham says there's a person who lived with his mother-in-law, Asir Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda came along, brought him Nakdeh, and he gave him Malchus. Omalei, he said, he loved the Omar Shmuel. It's not for the fact that Shmuel said, Ein alach Rabbi Yehuda, asartilach Isur Olam. If it would not have said that Allah like Rabbi Yehuda, I would have followed Rabbi Yehuda, and everyone agrees when it comes to Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda said everyone agrees when it comes to your mother-in-law, your wife is also to you. So it's not for the fact that Shmuel said Allah is not like Rabbi Yehuda, that your wife can still live with you. I would have ruled that it's forbidden. You couldn't live with your wife anymore. Okay, so now we're going to examine, this is a little bit difficult, we're going to examine the Bryce on top of the page, that without the pasuk Oisa, I would have thought, a Kal V'chomer, in a place where there's a light Aveda, and the catalyst of that Aveda, it becomes Asr as well. Surely in the severe Aveda, like your wife's sister, the catalyst should be Usher as well. That means why is your wife's sister forbidden to you? Because of your wife. So therefore, since you cannot live with your wife's sister, and in this case you committed a sin, you should also be forbidden with your wife because she's the one who caused the Issa. That's why we need the pasuk Isa. So what is this light Issa that we're talking about? Says the Gemara. My Isa cow. What do you mean by a light Isa? Rav Chizda said, what's a light Isa? A lav. Compared to a wife's sister, which is Isa Karis, Isa Lam. What's the story? Let's say you take back your wife, you divorced, and she married somebody else, and then her husband dies or something, and you take, or she gets divorced, and you take her back. That's a light Isa. So what happens? You divorce your wife, and Reuben divorces his wife, and then Shimon marries her, separate guy, Shimon, stranger. Shimon is the cause that no longer Reuben can live with his wife, right? Shimon is the cause that Reuben can live with his wife because now she married somebody else, can never go back to her husband again. But now, if Reuben did take her back, in defiance, he took her back, so now he's the cause for Shimon's Isa. Shimon can no longer live with her either because his wife just married somebody else. Doesn't matter if it's the original husband, but live with somebody else, marry somebody else, can no longer go back to him. So therefore, like this. Yeah. So therefore, what do we see? That each one is the cause of this. The other one, they themselves become asa. And so therefore, we would say, surely the wife's sister, the wife, should become asa to you as well. Said, well, what are you talking about? You know what? Machzir is worse. It makes more sense to say that both people are asa. She herself was involved. She's the one who lived with both people. So therefore, that's why she's asa to go back to either one. Number one, Rashi says you admit that. You can never ever. There's no situation where the original husband can take her back. She lives with another person. Even that other person dies, for example, she cannot take her back. But when it comes to your wife's sister, if your wife passes away, if somebody's wife passes away, you can then live with the sister. So it's actually a weaker Isa. So maybe your wife is permitted. Can't learn. There's no kalochem here. I'll tell you. I'll give you another kalochem where we would say that the catalyst of the Isa becomes asa, so to your wife. Since she's the catalyst of the Isa, she'll become asa. What about Yevam? The case of Yevam. So the Gemara, what are you talking about? What's exactly the case? Yevam Laman, who came along and committed an Isa with her. So what's going on? Let's say she's waiting to marry her brother-in-law. She married a stranger, and because she married a stranger, she can no longer live with her brother-in-law, like Rav Nuna said. We had it already before. No, but Rav Nuna said, a woman is waiting as if she's married to somebody, and therefore she lives with somebody else, even has nus with somebody else, like a married woman who has nus with somebody else. She can no longer go back to the Yevama. Now, what Isa is she doing when she lives with somebody else? It's merely a lab, right? It's a weak Isa. And nevertheless, the Yevama can no longer live with her. So we see that the reason why she couldn't marry somebody else is because she has a brother-in-law in waiting. So the brother-in-law is the catalyst for the Isa. But if she does go ahead and live with somebody else, she can no longer live with the brother-in-law. So we see that the catalyst of the Isa becomes Asr as well. So the same thing by a wife's sister. Since she's the cause of the Isa, she should become Asr. Again, we'll say it's different. Over there again, she was the one involved in that sin. And the Isur B'Roi, if she couldn't live with anybody, it's not only one particular person she can't live with. She can't live with any stranger except her brother-in-law. So they say with everybody. So it's much stricter. By saying the wife's sister, the only one that the wife's sister cannot live with is her husband. Everyone else is permitted to. She's a single girl. So she's permitted to everybody else. So it's a much weaker Isur. And plus the wife herself is not involved in the Isur. So maybe it should be permitted. What's the Kalachayman? Let's go back to Yevama, maybe a different Yevama. Yevama la'achid, brother amongst brothers. What happened here? One brother went ahead, and one of the brothers went ahead and had, let's say, be with her. Which and what happened is, and it asks this. And what's the story here? And the story is as follows: that let's say there were two brothers waiting, Shimon and Levi, and one of the brothers went ahead and did a maimer with the Rabbanan. Maimer is only recognized with the Rabbanan, not in the Torah. But once you do a maimer, Levi can no longer live with her because Shimon is the one who did the maimer. And so it's a very weak issue, right? That she can't live with Levi. According to the Torah, the maimer is nothing. She can live with Levi. It's only with the Rabbanan. What happens then? So Shimon was the cause that she cannot live with Levi. What happens then, Levi? What is it? Right? He asks it on Levi. Then what happened when Levi decides to have relations with her? then Asala the high, she can no longer go back to Shimon. So Shimon was the cause of the Issa that she could live with Levi, but then if she lived with Levi, it ricochets back, and now Shimon cannot live with her anymore because she had relations with Levi. So here we see that the catalyst becomes Asa. So do a wife sister, the wife should become Asa as well. First of all, if so, my Yiddish bol, what's the relevance here? That it says in the Bryce of bol that he had relations, even if Levi didn't have relations. Let's say Levi gave a mimer as well, nothing more than a mimer. Since you can give a mimer after a mimer because it wasn't yet totally cemented, so now neither of them can live. What do you have to say? Dafke bol, my Yiddish bol, sheni, I feel over on mimer. Holocaust, that doesn't bother me. Why the Brisa has to say that bol? Why does it bother me? Because maybe the Brisa has a real ain't maimer. You can't have a second maimer, so the only way that it can cause trouble is if the second person goes ahead and had beer with her. Okay, but what do you have to elafil nashal get? What happens? Let's say if Shimon, let's say, gave her a get, or afilu chalafla, or Shimon Chalitza still cannot live. What happens if the brother gave her a get? Or let's say Levi gave her a get, they gave her Chalitza, she can no longer live with Shimon. Shimon was the cause of the Isser now because to Levi, and now Levi did a get. Shimon becomes Asa. So why talk about Bola? What's the relevance of having relations? Obviously, that's not the case we're talking about. So, but Elorich said, I'll tell you the case, the Kawachim, and what's the light of their site? That she was a site she committed adultery. Lama. So who we're talking about here? Ilema lebal, are we saying it what? To her husband. In other words, the din is by a saita. Once the husband suspects her and warns her and everything else, and now he has to admonish her, now he has to take her to the base of Mikdash to drink that water, like we read this week's parsha. But so the husband no longer is allowed to have any relations with her whatsoever. So what happens? They do have relations after all this, and he has relations. Then the din is that the husband is the one that caused that she caused her Easter. The husband is the one who caused her Easter because the husband now, even if the husband dies, for example, she can no longer live with the person that she committed adultery with. And now if the husband goes ahead and lives with her afterwards, he is forbidden to live with her afterwards. So he was the cause of the Easter because she was married to him and he wanted everything else. She was the cause why she can't live with that other guy, and yet she can't live with him either. So the cause becomes the effect as well. So that if, let's say, the Baal has relations, becomes also to the boil. Is that the case? Is only if he had relations with the husband, if she had relations with her husband after the admonishment, she's also to the adulterer. It's irrelevant. I feel nothing again. Let's say she had no more relations with her husband. She still cannot live with that person, the adulterer that she had liaisons with, because she committed a sin with him while she was married. So even if the first husband gives her a divorce, I feel any mashkin, if he says, I refuse to give her anything to drink, she's still forbidden to the other guy. So why Dafke if the original husband had relations with her? It's irrelevant. If the original husband continues to have relations with her, don't have relations with her, he is always forbidden to that adulterer. Ella Saita Leboil. We're talking about what happens that after, let's say, she had continued to have relations with this person, with this adulterer. So she continued to have relations with this adulterer. The husband is the cause. What do you call it? She continued to have relations, so now she's forbidden to her own husband. The husband is the cause why it's considered a sin. Why is it a sin to live with that other person? Because of your husband. And as a result of continuing to live with the other person, you cannot go back to your husband. Says the Gemara, right? So we see that the cause becomes the effect. So therefore, the wife who causes the Isa, that your wife's sister, so she should be the effect as well. Says the Gemara, Hi Isa Kalu. That's called a lenient, a light Isa. Isa Chamaru. I know she's a married woman committing adultery. That's not a light Isa. That's a terrible Isa. You get Chayiv Misa. El Amar says Rabbi. I'll tell you what it means. You know what Isa Kal is? You're right. H is Ish. H is Ish compared to your wife's sister is considered Isa Kal. Why is Isa Kal? Because there's a way of getting out of it. Your husband can give you a divorce, and therefore you're no longer an Ish. Or the wife's sister, as long as your wife is alive, that woman will always be usher to you. There's nothing, even if she's divorced from her husband, or even if you divorce your wife, she will always be usher to you. So it's much stricter. So the Gemara H is Ish. Well, my call is a cow. So why is it called a light Isa? Because it's not forbidden. It is not forbidden forevermore when it comes to your an H she can have a get. H is ish. You're talking about an H is ish, and the Kavachayim it is. Without the pasuk oisa, I would have thought that your wife's sister, if you have a relation with your wife's sister, surely you can no longer with your wife. The one who asks her does not ask her all your days. Nevertheless, that becomes usher, that the cause becomes usher, right? You can no longer live with a husband. A husband does not ask you forever, he can give you divorce. Yet if you had extramarital relations, you can no longer live with your husband because he's the catalyst, he becomes the effect. So if you come with a stricter Isa, your wife's sister, then your wife, which is the cause of that Isa, is the rest of her life, you're forbidden to your sister. And then surely, surely that what? The Nesra Isa, that the Isa become Asa. That's why the pasuk would have told us that definitely you should not be able to go back to your wife because she's the catalyst of the Issa. Therefore, you shouldn't be able to live with your wife if you had relations with her sister. That's what it says in the Shochavi. If she was involved in the Issa, then she was a choisa. But having a relation with her sister does not involve her, and she's permitted to her husband. Okay, now we'll continue the understanding. Okay, we understand Rabbi Yehuda now goes Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi said in our Mishnah. In our Mishnah, Rabbi Yossi said the following, and which is a big cryptic. Rabbi Yossi said that anything which he passels, if you passel the other person, you become passel. If you don't passel the other person, the result of your actions with that other person does not become passel, then you also do not become passel. So we're going to have to learn, and we already started off the Gemara saying, according to Tanakama, the way we understood the Gemara before, if let's say there's Ruvain married to Leah, and Shimon is married to Rachel, and Shimon, your brother, two sisters, and let's say Shimon is a stranger, two sisters and two brothers-in-law, and Shimon traveled with Leah, your wife, and Shimon went abroad, went overseas, and you heard that they both died. The way we learned when I was a single witness came and said both died. So Reuven now married his sister-in-law, and then they both came back. So the Tanakh says the sister-in-law, Rachel, who was married to Shimon, cannot go back to Shimon because, like the case in our Mishnah, she relied on a single aid. And the way we told her, yes, the Bezin said you can go, now your husband is dead, single aid, you can get married, but you should have done your due diligence. And she didn't, the husband came back, so she was an Ish. When she lived with Reuven, she cannot go back to Shimon. But Reuven, on the other hand, could take back his original wife. He can go back to her. So that's Tanakh said. And Rabbi Yossi argues. So we're going to try to understand what Rabbi Yossi is saying. He doesn't explain himself. My comment, Rabbi Yossi. What does Rabbi Yossi mean when he says what he said? And Rabbi Yossi has two sides. He says, if the other person becomes Asa because of you, then you become Asa. And sounds like that if Shimon's wife cannot live with Shimon anymore, then your wife coming back, you can no longer live with your wife. But in a case where Shimon can live with his wife, then you also can live with your wife. So we're going to try to understand what these two cases are. Rabbi Yossi goes, what's my comment, Rabbi Yossi? What's Rabbi Yossi saying? Are we learning the way we just said? The Tanakama, before the way we just said. Are we learning the Tanakama is talking about a case? The Ozel Ishta V'Gisa Nizayam. Your wife Leah and your brother-in-law Shimon went overseas, and the Lord and the Tanakama says, H's Gisa, when they come back, H's Gisa, so Shimon can no longer live with his wife because she was a married woman and she lived with Reuven, and therefore it's a problem. She can't go back to her wife. She should have done due diligence. So it's a knas, even though it's not really a fault. The Ishta Sharia, but Reuven can't take his wife back, and therefore Rabbi Yossi argues and says no, and he want to be lenient. Since you're going to tell me that Reuven can take back his wife, then it's only fair that Shimon should take back his wife. Because Minat Torah really Shimon should be take back his wife because it's not her fault. She listened to a bezin. It's only the Rabbanon we want to penalize her. So maybe in this case it looks odd. The same story, two brothers, two sisters, same story. Why should one be permitted and one should be forbidden? We should permit everything. That's what Rabbi Yossi is saying. If that's what he's saying, the wording is incorrect. So, what do you mean? he doesn't passel others, he doesn't pass himself. But should have said, the way you learn right now is because Reuven is allowed to marry, take back his original wife, therefore Shimon can take back his wife. So the wording should have been the other way around. If he does not disqualify his own wife, in other words, he can live with his own wife, therefore, therefore, as a result of his actions, the other one also should not be possible. And Shimon should be able to take back his wife. It's exactly the opposite wording what he said. That's what he should have said. Hello. So this is what I'm basically saying, where we just said before. Where we started out. The age is He's arguing. He says, because of you, Shimon, because of your actions, Shimon cannot live with his wife anymore. Therefore, you should not be able to live with your wife either. So therefore, we understand that half of the phrase. If anybody is disqualified because of you, you're also disqualified as well. So since Shimon cannot live with his wife because of your actions, you live with his wife. Therefore, you can no longer live with your wife. Fine. So Hoteinach, that makes sense. Half of what his statement was. Kosher poisel, that anyone he disqualifies, he passes well. But she'enu poisel mavir. But tell me the other half of the brisa. The other half of the Mishnah, Rabbi Yossi says, and if you don't disqualify, then you're also mutter. What's that case there? Where do we have a case here where the other person also is permitted? That's what we're trying to figure out. We have a case of permitted. We're going to have two answers, Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Yisrael. Rabbi Ami continues learning the way we're learning, but remember in the previous Mishnah, there's a difference between if you're married based on a single witness or you're married based on two witnesses. If you're married based on a single witness, you should know your due diligence. You cannot go back to your first husband. But if you're married based on two witnesses, you don't have to go to Beis Din. You can go ahead and marry. And Rav Shimon says that therefore you could, if your husband comes back, you can go back to the first husband because what could he have done? Or you follow the two Eidim. You can go back to your original husband. And this Mishnah, Rabbi Yossi continues on that theme. And Rabbi Yossi is saying here is, if it's based on a single witness, since Shimon can never live together, neither could Reuven go back to his wife. But if it was based on two witnesses, since Shimon and his wife can get back together because they heard that he died based on two witnesses, since therefore she married Reuven. But then when the husband comes back, she can go back to Shimon because the marriage to Reuven was never a real marriage because he was already a married woman. So therefore, in that case, Reuven can take his wife back. That's what Rabbi Yossi is saying. This Mishnah continues from the beginning of the first Mishnah we learned, where there makes a difference between a single aid or a double aid. If you're married based on a single witness, you need a Beis Din's ruling, and then the husband comes back, she has to leave her husband because she should have done a due diligence. She's exempt from a carbon because it's the Beis Din's ruling. But we said Al Pi Eidim, but two witnesses came along. She has to leave the second marriage and she can go back to the first one. But Chayev is the carbon. The Beis Din ruling parts of the carbon. Tanakama says Loishna Al Pi Eid is the the Tanakama says, I don't care if this story is based on witnesses, the Eish is Gisa Shaya, so Shimon could live with his wife, or Loishna, Al Pi Beis Din, I don't care if it's talking about a case with a single witness, where in that case over there, Shimon cannot take back his wife, the Eish is Gisa Shaya. In both cases, Reuven could always take his wife back, just because Shimon cannot live with his wife as a result of what Reuven did, but doesn't affect in any way Reuven and his own wife. She's permitted. Rabbi Yossi disagrees. He says, no, I believe there's a difference if it's a single aid or double aid. Al Pi Beis Din, the paisel. In the case of a single witness, where because of you, Reuven, Shimon can no longer with his wife. The paisel but that's for you also can no longer live with your wife because your actions ruin somebody else. Ruin your own life. But Al Pi Eidim, based on two witnesses, there ain't no place like Chedim, where you don't ruin anybody else's life, because with two witnesses, then Shimon can take back his wife. So he didn't ruin anybody, you can live with your wife. Ain't a place of the Atzman. So where does Rabbi Yossi argue in Tanakama? Only in the case of two witnesses, because you say in the case of two witnesses, in the case of a single witness, you Tanakama say in the case of a single witness, Reuven still can take back his original wife. I say no, because Shimon cannot take back his wife, neither can Reuven take back his original wife. That's Rabbi. That's how we learned till now. Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha has another pshat. Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha says, what are the two sides of the coin? Rabbi Yossi said that if he disqualifies, fine, we know what that means. What do you mean if he doesn't disqualify? The difference is not going to be 1 aid or 2 aid. He said we're talking about 1 aid. However, he says the reason why by a single aid you cannot go back to your original husband, why if she relied on aid and then the husband comes back, she's forbidden to go back to her original husband. It's not because of a punishment. It's because of what people are going to say. People are going to think that that if she was married to her husband and then she married somebody else, people think, you know what? Probably the husband divorced her, and then she married somebody else. And then they see if the husband comes back, she goes back to the original husband. They're going to say, if you divorce your wife, she married somebody else, you can take her back. That's what they're going to think. And because of that concern that people think that you're taking your original wife back because there was a divorce here, that is a problem. That is a problem because they're going to say that that you're allowed to do that. That's why we don't let her go back. But let's say they were merely engaged. When they're merely engaged, instead of people saying, oh, he must have divorced her and she married another guy, people are rather going to say, probably the whole engagement was based on some kind of a condition. The condition wasn't met. That means he was never married to the first guy. And now she was married to the second guy. The second guy must divorce her and she can go back to the first guy. So if it was only engaged, she could go back to the original husband because people are not going to assume that the first husband divorced her and he's taking her back. They're going to assume that the first husband made the condition conditional and then he left and obviously didn't meet the condition. There was no condition at all. Now it's getting married for the first time. That's how we learn Pshat in our Mishnah. As a result of that, in this case, it'll be exactly the opposite. Because it's a wife's sister, and in the case of where they were married, it'll be just opposite. People are going to say the husband comes back. They're going to say it can't be that the first husband divorced her and that for the second guy married her, because you're not allowed to marry your wife's sister. Remember, the second guy is married to the sister. The second guy, Shimon, couldn't marry Reuben's wife. Or let's say in our way we learned before. Reuben and Reuben's wife Leah went overseas, and Shimon went overseas. And then Reuben married Shimon's wife. People are not going to say, oh, Shimon must have divorced her, and therefore Reuben married her, and therefore can't go back to the husband. They won't say that because everyone knows you're not going to marry your wife's sister, even if you're divorced. Even if he divorces his first wife, he cannot live with your wife's sister anymore. So therefore, what are they going to say? They're going to say that he was never married. That's something they're going to say over here that no, she was never married to Reuben, even though they lived together. It must have been a mistake. They relied on the witnesses. And therefore, they'll say that she can go back to Reuben Shimon. In this case, if she was married, she could go back. In the case of two sisters, there's no mistakes that can arise from here. Everybody will realize the whole thing was a mistake. It's an error. And therefore, she can go back to her original husband. So before, but if she was only engaged, and then there's a problem. People are going to say, "Oh, she was only engaged," and then Reuben was engaged to his wife Leah, and then they see that Shimon's wife is married to Reuben. They're going to assume that Reuben and Leah had on a conditional condition. It unraveled, and therefore Reuben was taka married to Shimon's wife. In that case, how can Reuben take back his original wife? So it's a sister. Even if he divorces her, now she can go back to Shimon. But Reuben can't live with her anymore because with his own wife, because it's the sister of his divorcee, a divorced wife. Says the Gemara. Let's get the parentheses. The case that he says is forbidden is talking about when his engaged wife went with the brother-in-law. That the Reuben was only engaged to Leah. But if Reuben was married to Leah, then he could take her back. And Gemara explains. And Shimon could take her back as well. If Reuben was married to Leah, then Reuben and Shimon both could take back their wives. If Reuben was not married to Leah when he divorced, then Reuben cannot take her back. And Gemara explains. The comment says, I don't care if it's his wife and the brother-in-law, the rule is as follows. Shimon cannot take back his wife, and the Ishte Shaya. But Reuben can take back his wife. Rabbi says no. When it comes to his wife, if Reuben was married to Leah, and then she and her brother went overseas and they heard, and then Reuben took Leah, Shimon's wife Rachel, nobody's going to say, oh, there was a condition. Nobody makes a marriage on a condition, because it means if it doesn't work out, you've been living all these years in sin. Nobody assumes that. Since Shimon can take back his wife, because everybody realizes that Reuben was never married to Shimon's wife, because it's his wife's sister. How could Reuben marry her? No matter what happened, there's no circumstance he can marry her. And therefore, since they see that Reuben's wife is back, they're going to realize the whole thing was based on a mistake. They must have thought that Reuben's wife is dead. And therefore, the whole thing is a mistake. She was never really married to Reuben, so she can go back to her husband. Ain't no place to answer. Since she can go back to her husband, he also can take back his original wife. But if Reuben was merely engaged to Leah, and then Shimon was married to Rachel, and then when Reuben married Shimon's wife, people will say maybe it was a proper marriage. Maybe Reuben and Leah had a conditional engagement. Was conditional, and therefore Reuben was not marrying his wife's sister because it was no longer his fiance, because it unraveled, and therefore his marriage to Rachel was a proper marriage. He passes himself as well. He cannot live with his wife anymore. Omri Shmuel halacha Rabbi Yossi. Come look at Shmuel halacha like Rabbi Yossi. Maske for Rabbi Yossi. So Shmuel says the halacha is like Rabbi Yossi. So Maske for Rabbi Yossi said, I don't understand. The Shmuel actually say that. We learned Yevama. We learned these words. It says, what about a Yevama? Rav says that a Yevama, harehu ke'eshes ish. Rav says that a Yevama is just like a married woman. See, remember what that means? Shmuel Amar ain't occasion, not like a married woman. What are they talking about? What do you mean? It's like a married woman, a Yevama, a sister-in-law waiting for a brother-in-law. What do you mean like a married woman? Said, this is what happened. That what you mean is, let's say that the brother goes ahead and gives kedushin to a woman. The halach didn't say. So Reuben got engaged to Leah, and then he went overseas. Everybody heard that Reuben died. Comes along Shimon, as a brother-in-law, Reuben's brother, and goes ahead and marries this woman. He goes, and then Reuben comes back. Now, when Reuben comes back, everybody will realize it can't be that Reuben. It can't be that what do you call that? Reuben divorced his wife, and then Shimon married, and now Reuben is taking back his original wife. It can't be, because you cannot live with your brother's wife. You can never live with your brother's wife, even if they're divorced. Can't be. So therefore, Rav says it's just like a married woman that got married based on a single aid, that she cannot go back to her first husband. Here also, she cannot go back to her first husband, because what are people going to assume? People are going to assume that why did Shimon marry her? Because Reuben never was married. Not that Reuben gave a divorce or Shimon decided to marry her, because you cannot marry your brother's divorced wife. They'll say there was a condition. The condition unraveled, and therefore Shimon married her rightfully. So that's why Reuben cannot take her back, because then they're going to say, what? Reuben now is, how can Reuben go live with his brother's wife? So that's what Rav says, like an HZ, she cannot go back to her first husband. Ushmul says, it's not like a married wife and could go back to her husband. In other words, according to Shmuel, we don't assume that people are going to say, that he divorced his wife. So that the wife was that the kedushin was the whole kedushin. We're talking about kedushin. We're not going to Shmuel doesn't hold of this whole idea that that kedushin was built on a Tanai and the Tanai fell apart. We don't say that. How can it doesn't say that at all? Says the Gemara, so how can Shmuel say that Rabbi Yossi? That was the whole point of Rabbi Yossi. That if it was a kedushin, people are going to say that the kedushin must have unraveled, and therefore the marriage to the second person was a proper marriage. And here Shmuel says that we don't say that the kedushin unraveled, and therefore Shmuel says it's not like a married woman. And if you live with Shimon and the Reuben comes back, you can go back to Reuben. Those we don't say, that there's no kedushin to Reuben, the marriage to Shimon was real, and how can then Reuben go ahead and live with her? Or even Shimon divorces her, how can Reuben live with her? It's his brother's wife. No, but Shmuel doesn't hold of this whole thing that is up tonight. How can you say Allah Rabbi Yossi? Abai said, you assume that Shmuel learned like Rabbi Nafcha, that the whole idea is that whether the kedushin the Tanai unraveled, maybe he's following Rab Ami, which is the way. But first, way we learned that Rabbi Yossi has nothing to do. We're not talking about at all about that the kedushin was a Tanai. We're not talking about Erishin at all. We're only talking about a married woman, and the difference was whether it was a single aid or a double aid. Rabbi Yossi is not talking at all about what happens if you only got engaged, and do we say people assume that it was only a Tanai? No such thing. So therefore, it's not a problem. Furthermore, and even if you want to say as Rabbi Shmuel, even if you want to say that he follows the way of Rabbi Shmuel, who said when he said Allah Rabbi Yossi means in every respect? Who said in the case where he says it is forbidden, which we say because we say that the first kedushin was not a valid kedushin, and therefore the marriage to the second wife to the sister was a valid marriage, therefore you cannot go back to the first wife. Who said that part? Remember, two didn't Rabbi Yossi said. Who said that he's agreeing that Allah Rabbi Yossi when it comes to the part where it's forbidden, the Dilma ain't a person. Maybe it's on the part where it is permitted. And that is what he is saying. That this other part where he says that since he does not aser Shimon on his wife, he can live with his own wife. That's the part where he says the halacha is like Rabbi Yossi. And therefore there's no question, nothing to do at all with his din about a Yevama. Okay, we'll stop here. And tomorrow continues how to understand the part of Yevama, but it's totally different than what we just learned today. It just gives you a very simple pshat. So we'll continue tomorrow, on the top of the page. Have a good Shabbos, everybody. And tomorrow we'll start.